first of all, what I want to do is just give you a quick introduction to Lightning Tools for anybody that hasn't joined one of our webinars before. We'll have a very quick intro, and then we'll jump into some live demonstrations of the data viewer. We'll be connecting to several different data sources, building different types of reports, and also building some charts as well. So first of all, just to give you that background, so Lightning Tools is a company based here in the UK. We're very central to England, near a town called Rugby, and yeah, from here we're developing different products for Microsoft SharePoint, and we have been doing that for the past 16 years now. So starting off actually with data integration through a product called BDC MetaMan, so that worked with the Business Data Catalog, and then we've started to add, of course, numerous different products to our portfolio, and the data viewer being one of those as well. So we have in the portfolio the permissions management tool, which is known as DeliverPoint. We've also got a content aggregation tool. You'll see a little bit of that today because we're actually going to use that as a data source for the data viewer. We also have a Lightning Filters tool, which will work also with the data viewer, and that happens to be free. We have a discussion board, which is called Social Squared, and that's something that provides you with that sort of forum type functionality inside of SharePoint or Teams. The data viewer, of course, which we're going to be taking a look at today. And we've also got some form design tools known as Lightning Forms, and that's accompanied by the document generator as well, and list actions, which we won't be getting into today. But if you want to have a look at any of those products, there have been webinars throughout last year, and there's some that we're scheduling this year as well. So moving into the data viewer. So first of all, what's the why for the data viewer? So the data viewer is a product that actually started off back in 2007. We created that really to provide some data integration for SharePoint 2007 at that time, and then we evolved it through different versions of SharePoint on premises. But today it's very different. It's created under the SharePoint framework for modern SharePoint, the modern SharePoint experience, and that also equates to Microsoft Teams as well, so you can add it to a Teams channel if you wanted to connect to different data sources and expose that data inside of a channel that you're working in. So the idea is that it's a self-service tool. It's something that you don't have to be IT in order to be able to use. You can use this if you're a site owner. So if you create yourself a site that might be for a project, maybe for a department, or just a small team that you're heading up, or of course, yeah, Microsoft Teams team, or a modern SharePoint site. So once you've created that and you are the owner of that site, you'll be able to add the data viewer to one of the pages or into one of the channels, and you'll be able to configure it to display dynamic data that is actually connected dynamically to the data source. So there's no sort of scheduled refreshes or anything like that. It will actually refresh either automatically or along with the page refresh, and that will bring the data and display the data as you refresh it. So there's no limitations on how many times you can refresh data and so on with the data viewer. You can also display that as a chart as well, and there's a series of different charts that you can get into, such as combo charts and pie charts, gauges and tree maps and things like that too. So that's the intention, is to really sort of empower that SharePoint site owner or the Teams owner to be able to integrate some of the back-end data into Microsoft SharePoint and design a view or design a chart the way that you want it, so it's serving the purpose of your organization. And of course the business challenge that it's facing or overcoming there is the fact that any organization has these silos of data. So it could be different on-premises data sources, it may be other cloud data sources that you have, and those are usually applications that are serving a purpose for, again, a particular department. So your accounts department may be running something like Sage or Xero. You may also have HubSpot, Salesforce, or something along those lines, or you may even have custom databases that are stored in SQL Azure, or again on-premises ones that you may be able to access remotely through OData and so on. There's even Excel documents that we create, or even SharePoint lists that might reside in different SharePoint sites or different teams that we also want to gain access to, so we're not duplicating that content across multiple sites. So there's lots of reasons for using a product such as the data viewer. So as mentioned, it is a modern experience. So one of the reasons why I mentioned that, if you look at business connectivity services, which you may have used prior to Microsoft 365, or you may even use it in Microsoft 365, one of the challenges with the business connectivity services is it hasn't really evolved much since the SharePoint 2013 days in terms of the look and feel. So we're now experiencing these nice modern Microsoft lists, a nice modern SharePoint site, and so on. And then if you use an external list, it looks classic, and it isn't that appealing to use inside that department. So the data viewer is actually something that you could even connect to the business data catalog. If you've used that in the past, or business connectivity services, you could use that external content type and display that data still inside a modern experience using the data viewer. So yeah, lots of other different data sources that you can connect to, and of course the business connectivity services opens it up to a few more too. We can, as I already mentioned, use it in Teams or on a SharePoint page, and you can also design the look and feel using things like conditional formatting. You can add groupings and data bars and calculated columns, all without actually having to get your hands dirty in any JSON code or anything like that. So it's all configured throughout the user experience when you're using the data viewer. So yeah, there's different charts that I mentioned, and there's also the ability to connect multiple instances of the data viewer together, which we're going to get into as well. So if you are connecting to a data source that is perhaps a relational database and you want to show that one-to-many type join, we can do that using the data viewer. Just simply connect them together using the filters, and that means that you could click onto, for example, a customer and see the orders related to that customer. We could then click onto an order, see the order details, click onto an order detail, see the products, and so on. So you can drive through the data using the data viewer on a SharePoint page as well. Okay, so we'll get into it. So as I mentioned, you can add it to your modern pages. That's where we're going to start off. We're going to go through and connect to various different data sources so you can see how they're configured, and we'll get into all the joins, we'll get into all the conditional formatting and so on. So what we're going to create, I'll show you live, in fact, in the demo now. So let's just bring that up. So I'll drop my camera so you can see my screen more clearly as well. So here in SharePoint, what we have is some pre-configured data view instances, which we're going to first of all just have a quick look at, and then I'll create a brand new page and we'll get into configuring it before we start looking at charts as well. So on this page, there's several different instances. You can see we've got a chart. We've got 4 or 5 different data viewer instances showing a grid of data. And on the left-hand side here is my customers. We've also got orders, and we've got order details. So from the customers, if I wanted to start selecting certain customers because I want to drill into the data, we can choose Anton here. So that's the customer ID. And as we select that, we can see that in the past, he's just placed one order. And as we select that order, we can see that there was just a single line on that order. So one product, which was placed. And we can go through and select other customers as well in here and notice how that's drilling in further. So it's still got Anton selected, but we could deselect that one, maybe choose a different order. And again, we could see that that particular customer has 2 different order lines on that order, and so on. So that's how we can get into seeing some of that relational data formatted into different tables on that SharePoint page. And yeah, there's another example here which is coming through a different data source that we'll also get into. You'll see there's conditional formatting. So we've got a little bit of that. We can see the discounts applied to some of these orders as well. And if there is a discount applied, then it's showing that with the modern pill format with the blue color, and we've also got green if there isn't a discount applied as well. So we've got that type of conditional formatting going on that we can easily configure using the data viewer. So let's get into creating that. So I'm going to add a brand new page. So we'll create a new page here. And I'm just going to give that a title. And what I'd like to do is let's just add a new section with 2 columns, which is quite handy when you are creating related data as well. So I can add a data viewer instance here on the left-hand side, and I could add another Data Viewer instance here on the right hand side and have those side by side. That's great if you're building a dashboard of charts as well, so you're not just having to scroll down the page. We can see those side by side and see several charts at once. So on the left hand side, we've got a brand new instance of the Data Viewer. When we hit configure, notice that we've got the 4 different tabs down on the left, which we'll need to visit each of those to get our configuration created. So starting off on the first tab is where we can choose the data source type that we want to connect to. And whilst there's only 6 entries in here, some of these actually open up to lots of different types of data that we could connect to. So if we take a SharePoint list, for example, if we were to select that, when we go to the data source tab, it's going to load all of my site collections, and we could go through and drill into those site collections in order to access a list, and we could then select the columns from that list and design our view. So this is a great experience if you've got maybe a contacts list maintained in one particular site and you want to display that in several other sites as well without having to duplicate that content. We can just simply bring that across and add the conditional formatting to it. Business connectivity services, if you are using that, then notice how the data source tab changes. So this time it's expecting a namespace and an external content type name, so you can get that through your admin panel and use that. We can connect directly to SQL Azure. I'm going to skip OData because I'm going to come back to that one in just a moment because that's what we'll actually use for the demo. But if we are connecting to SQL Azure, and we will do an example of this one because I realize that quite a few people on the call do want to do this. So I'm going to choose SQL Azure. And in here, under the data source tab, notice that I can just simply drop in the connection information. And then once we hit load entities, that's going to bring back the databases for me to choose from. And we can select, therefore, a sample database like AdventureWorks in this case, and we can also choose a table or a view. So notice how we've got our views here, and we've also got our tables. So if I was to select, for example, products, when we get into the columns, I can now start choosing different columns coming from there, and I might as well just finish this one off. Let's just choose a few different columns. We'll drag and drop them into the order that we may want them to appear in, and then I'm not going to do any formatting yet. We'll come back to that in just a moment. But notice how easy that was. We've now got our data coming from a SQL Azure database and into SharePoint, and now we can start adding any conditional formatting and things like that that we want to use. So we can also have multiple views on this one. So I'm going to label this one as SQL Azure just so we know what that is, and I'll put -products. But I could go in and create another view as well, and this one here will work with Excel. So as we go back into the configuration, we can go through and choose a Microsoft Excel workbook. And again, this could be a grid view or it could be a chart. And we can navigate down to where that data source is. So right at the very top, we've got the current site that I'm in. And as I choose documents, we can select from a list of different Excel documents. We can choose the sheets that happen to have data on them. It picks up the data range for me automatically, although of course I could change that. And as we hit save there, we've now got the columns coming in from that Excel workbook. So we can go through and select those and hit display. And again, I'll come back and do the formatting, but you'll notice here that here's our data coming in from Microsoft Excel. So yeah, that's going to be useful for a chart a little bit later on too. So this means that people don't have to keep opening up the Excel document. If they're just really using it to get the summary information from, they can just simply view that from the SharePoint page or from within Teams where they are. So I'm just going to create another one, and this can be on OData. And for this, feel free to play around with it. If you're trialing the data viewer, you can go to the OData service, and what I'm going to do is go to this service here, and I'll actually show you how I get to that. So if you go to odata.org, and under developers, you can go to reference services, and then I'm going to go to OData version 3 because it's got a nice sample database. And there's Northwind, which if ever you did anything with Microsoft Access in the years gone by, you'll remember Northwind and Nancy DeVolio and all those lovely people. So I can choose this database here. And when we go back to our page, we can drop in that service URL load our entities, and in here you can see we're bringing back products, regions, shippers, suppliers, etc. And I'm going to work with customers on this one. So we'll choose the customers entity, and now I can select columns from that view as well. So the only tab that ever changes in the data viewer is that data source tab. Of course, depending on the data source that we choose, is going to require different information. So OData is simply just expecting the service URL and any credentials to access that. This one happens to be not requiring any credentials. So then I can go in and choose the columns that I want to show. So I'm just going to pick up those address columns, anything that I feel is relevant, of course, leaving facts behind. And then when we go into the display, now we can actually start getting into some of the different formatting and so on. So all of these are, of course, just address details. They're all going to be formatted as strings, so there's nothing too exciting to look at here. We'll get more into the data formatting shortly. But notice we've also got things like alignments. We can do grouping, so maybe we're grouping by country or something like that. You can actually group by as many columns as you like. There's no limitation to that, and you can set the primary, secondary, tertiary sorting and so on as well. So I'm just going to sort by country there, or group by country. You can get into all of your color formatting too. So we can change the forecolor and the background color. We default to theme colors, or you can also go in and pick any color that you like if you want to make it look crazy. There's also conditional formatting as well, as I've already mentioned. So in there we can get into the conditional formatting, and this is very similar. It just means that there's a rule behind it, so we can choose when that conditional formatting is going to apply. And that could be from a static value that we give, or it could also be driven through a webpack connection as well, which is again something that we'll get into. So if you're going to be connecting multiple data viewer instances together, what is useful is to allow this option here to allow selecting rows. So that allows me to go through and select the rows as you saw me doing just a moment ago. And we've also got some other refinements like pagination, so we can add pagination to our web part. We can have a sticky header, so as we're scrolling down, we're still able to see the column headers at the top. We can choose the column header alignment. And if it's a SQL Azure database as well, we're really able to use writeback, so we can update the data and insert the data and so on. And of course, that's dependent upon permissions and also down to the site owner to decide whether they're going to allow that additionally to the database permissions. So as I hit save here, we've now got 3 different views that I can choose from. So we're going to click onto this OData one, and here's all the customers that are now grouped by country as we set it, and I've got that ability to go through and select rows, which isn't doing anything yet because we're not consuming that connection anywhere. So I'm now going to get into the second instance of the data viewer, and we're going to configure that again, also with OData and also with a grid view. And in here we'll use the same service URL, but this time I'm going to go against the orders table. So from the orders table, we're going to choose the customer ID. We'll have the order date, a few other things as well, like ship city, ship country, and so on. And then when we hit the display, once more we can get into data formatting and so on. So this time we've got different data sources to work with. We've got a date, so notice how on that drop down we can choose how we want that date to display. So we could have just the year and the month if that's what all we needed, or you could flip to a short date, and you can even overtype that with your own custom formatting if you wanted to as well. Okay, so so that one is bringing back the orders. Now I've just realized there's one additional column that I need to set on customers here. I didn't choose customer ID, so that is required for this demo. Okay, so let's save that one. So I've got the customer ID showing. And so what we're going to do with the second web part now is under the columns tab, I'm going to add a filter. So against the customer ID, we hit the filter icon, and instead of giving it a static value here to filter by, I'm going to use the web part connection. So as we click onto that, you'll notice that we see other components. One of them is just data viewer. I'll show you how we can make that a little bit more intuitive in a moment. And then from that data viewer, I can either work with all of the items returned, maybe if I was building a chart, or I can also work with just the selected items, which I'm going to do, and I'm going to pass through the customer ID from that selected row. So as I do that and we hit save, we've now got that scenario. So of course there's nothing selected, so we're not seeing any data. But now I can go through, and there we go. Some of these didn't actually place any orders. We'd have to get sales onto them. Okay, but yeah, there we go. We can go through and select some of these customers, and we can see the orders related to those customers. And of course, we can go through and repeat that for the order details and so on as well. Okay, so that is getting some of that data on. I'm just going to add another instance of the data viewer as well, and this is going to once more connect to the same OData service, but I'm going to bring back products this time. Products is just a bit more exciting. We've got lots of things that we might want to apply conditional formatting to, but before we do that, I'm going to show you this calculated column option. So inside this table, we've got a few different columns. We have unit price, units in stock, and units on order, all of which are numerical columns. What I'd like to do is maybe get an idea of the value of my stock. So what I'm going to do is just hit a new add calculated column option, and we'll call this value of stock. We'll make it a double in case there's any decimals in there, and now I can just simply build my calculation out. So we can have unit price. We'll add that in here. Plus, sorry, get my head around what I'm doing. Sorry, what am I talking about? So unit price times the units in stock. Let's get rid of that parentheses. I'm just going to keep this simple. You can get the idea of building a calculation. So so we've got the value of the stock. So I can select that. I can drag it down where I want it to be displayed. And we can again filter on that. We can apply sorting to it and so on. I'm just going to jump down to the display option, and here's our value of stock, which I can display therefore as a currency. So we can select that one. Likewise, we could set unit price to be currency as well. And if there's any other columns that I want to set any values on, I could do that too. Now, with connecting to some form of relational database, sometimes the labels aren't that pretty, so you can provide an alias. So the product could have a space in it. We could have product name instead of just product name or one word. And notice in here you can also get into all the custom formatting for that as well without using any JSON. You're just simply going through and applying the conditional formatting. So I can do that from here, as you've kind of already seen. We could add, for example, the units on order. Rather than seeing that as a static value, I could add that as a data bar. So I'm going to just take a guess on what the maximum might be. We'll save that. So when we look at our data, so we scroll to the right, that's not come through. But yeah, we could have data bars on here. We can also add other conditional formatting as well, such as maybe units in stock. But I don't have to do it all within inside that configuration panel. I can get into the formatting on the page here too. Let me just try refreshing that page because it's not behaving as I would like. There we go. Okay, so yeah, with the so units in stock, let's try that one more time. So we'll add a data bar to it. There we go. So our data bar is coming through. We can show or hide that underlying value if we want to, and we could also add the conditional formatting, maybe to highlight expensive items or something along those lines. So we don't have to be designing all the time in that custom dialog. We could apply it here. So if unit price happens to be greater than, let's say 50, we could add fore colors, back colors, or the modern experience pill colors as well. So we could highlight that as an expensive product and save this. And there's our conditional formatting coming through here. Okay, so that's a type of thing that we can do with the data viewer. What you've seen is connecting to multiple different data sources and designing that grid of data, and we can navigate that data through the web part connections as you've seen. So let's just hit republish on that one and jump back to the slides for a moment. Okay, so what we're going to get into next is building some charts using the exact same web part. So we don't always want to see that grid of data. Sometimes it's useful to show some other visualizations on that data as well. So we could, of course, build charts like this one. So this is a multi-series chart where we've got the extended price column and the freight column coming through, so we can see the total spend per country in here for both freight and for the products. And yeah, you've got that option to export the data and refresh the connection and that sort of thing too. But there's other different types of charts that you can also get into, like pie charts, tree maps and gauges that we're also going to take a look at. So let's just jump straight back into a demo and we'll get building some charts. But first of all, I want to show you some charts. So we're going to start off in Teams, and I'm going to go up to this technical support page, and in here we've got a SharePoint page added as a channel tab. It just so happens to have each of the different types of charts that we can create using the data viewer on this page here. So we've got a tree map first of all, so that is showing the popularity of each of the tags coming from Social Squared, which is one of our other products. We've also got the number of topics, likes and votes per month inside that discussion board tool. So if everything's got negative votes, you can see that's just dropping below 0 there with that green bar, so there's -1. We have also the number of topics per user that have been created, number of posts per forum, the gauges in here, and basically you can design these charts the way you want in order to be able to get to grips with how Social Squared, our discussion board tool, is being used inside your organization. So that's just a quick view of some of those different charts that we can create. But let's go and create some from scratch. So I'm going to edit the page here. And we'll scroll down. So we have another section. And what I can do is just get into those section properties here, and we'll make it 2 columns again. You can even go to 3 columns. It looks quite good with 3 charts side by side. But in our first column, if I can click in the right place, there we go. We'll choose the data viewer, hit configure, and I'm going to start off with that Excel workbook that we found. So I'm going to connect to Excel. We're going to change this from grid view down to chart view. And when we go to the data source, I'm going to expand the current site collection, the current site, drop into the document library, and select our sales revenue workbook again. So here's the columns that I want to work with. So we've got the sales month, sales revenue, and what the sales target was. And then when we jump into the display, you can see I've already got a chart created. And it's that chart that I want to configure a little bit further. So it's given us a line chart by default. We can change it to different types. So this is the drop down on the type of chart, but we'll start off here with the combo. And you'll notice that I've got sales revenue and sales target. So sales target works great, perhaps as a line, or could also work well as an area as well. So I'm just going to choose the area. We can set the opacity for that area, and we can choose a color. And I like to go for this green, and I'm not ill or anything. You'll like this, I hope. So I'm just going to add that green in here. So we've got a shaded green area, and then my sales revenue, we're going to make that column, and I'm going to contrast the green with the theme color. So if ever anybody comes in and changes the SharePoint theme color, the data viewer here is acting like a chameleon. It's just going to switch to whatever that theme is that's been applied. And notice how we can change the orientation, so we can have a bar chart or a column chart effectively, and we can also add trend lines and things like that onto the chart too. So now we can clearly see if our sales revenue has hit target. So you can see we've got a bit of work to do. Only April have we actually exceeded that. And yet we're we don't need to group by months. It's already just 1 month per row anyway, but yeah, we could group by months as well if we wanted to. There's also some of the chart settings that we can get into. So if you have got multi-series chart and you want to stack columns, you can do that. Both would need to be formatted as a column to stack it. But you've also got things like chart titles, and you've got the background color. You can show or hide the legend or have the legend shown somewhere else on the chart and so on as well. So all of those can be configured through there. So that is our first chart, really straightforward to create. Now, personally, I tend to find that I want to maybe get rid of these options on the chart, so you can hide all of those in the web part properties. That way, each of these charts look quite nice next to each other as a dashboard when you're configuring the chart component. Okay, so that was our first one, and we'll go in and add another Data Viewer instance here. So let's just configure that. And this one, again, I'm going to work with the OData service. We'll go to the chart view. I'm going to drop in the URL to that service one more time, and I'm going to come down to invoices. So on invoices, we can look at the list of columns again, and just bear with me. I'm just going to refer to my notes, and my tablet went to sleep, as to which of these columns do I want to choose from. Yep, so we're going to go with the ship country. So we have that one in here along with order date, and I want the extended price and the freight. So we've got all of those selected. I don't really care about the order. I could drag and drop these if they're in a grid view into the order that I want them in. I can also add calculated columns as well, which can also be part of the chart. But then under display, we've got our chart here. What I want to do is group by the ship country, because obviously it's showing a country for every single row of data inside that database. So we're going to group by that. And now we can design that chart however we want. So again, we'll go with a combo. You've seen the color formatting already. For each of those, we can choose a sum or any other sort of aggregate function as well. And then again, change this to scatter, area, column, or whatever you prefer to have displayed for your chart. So that's just doing a similar thing, but working with OData there as a data source. Okay, so other chart types. I'm actually going to jump back to the slides for a moment before we get into those, because we're going to look at how you could also use this data viewer to extend some of our other tools as well. So you've already seen Social Squared. So Social Squared is our discussion board tool, and in the back end of Social Squared is a series of different SharePoint lists. So we have a posts list, we have forums list, and so on, and we can basically go through and query those lists using the data viewer in order to be able to build that chart on it. We could also use it for the Lightning Conductor, which is our content aggregation tool. So the benefit of using the Lightning Conductor is you can aggregate content from multiple lists across multiple sites or multiple site collections, and you can also aggregate content from Microsoft Graph as well. So that opens it up to Planner and Teams and OneDrive or messages or users, anything that is accessible via the Microsoft Graph, basically, and we could build charts on that using the data viewer. If you're using Lightning Forms, then quite often with the Lightning Forms tool, you end up with an embedded sublist. So you might have, for example, a expense form with expense items embedded on it. So again, that's reflecting a one-to-many join. And if you want to build a view on that web part where you could select an expense form and see the expense items on the SharePoint page itself or in Teams, you could also accomplish that with the data viewer. And as I mentioned, you've also got Lightning Filters, which is the tool that you can connect to provide filter values, which is really, really useful for sort of dashboard formatting. So let's get into using the data viewer with other Lightning Tools products as well. And even if you don't use any of those other Lightning Tools products, you're going to see some different chart types that we can create here. So I'm just going to bring that up one more time. Okay, so I've already configured the Lightning Conductor on this page, and what you'll see on this page here is I've got two different views generated. This one here is a task list view. I will just jump into the configuration very quickly so you can see that one. So what this is doing here, this task list view, is performing an aggregation of tasks, and this is coming from multiple different sites. It's actually coming from the entire tenant to bring that data to us. So what I could do with the data viewer is configure a connection to that view. So as one data source we didn't mention was this current page data source. So I'm going to choose that one. We're going to build a chart view. And then on the data source tab here, we get to configure a web part connection. So I'm going to connect to the Lightning Conductor web part. And instead of having selected items, which we did before, I'm going to go with retrieved items. So that's all of the retrieved items in the view. And of course, if you've applied a filter to that view, it's going to be the filtered results. And then we've also got properties, which doesn't really matter here. I'm just going to work with everything that is being returned. So we've got a connection which we can go in and modify. Under columns, I've now got all of the columns available from the Lightning Conductor. And so this is basically tasks. I could choose the priority of those tasks, or maybe the status or something like that. I'll go with priority. And I've also got the ID. And the reason why I'm choosing the ID is every single task is going to have an ID. We can't get away from that. So it makes an ideal column for me to count when I'm building a chart. So we've got those two columns selected. When we go to the display, we now have a line chart, which isn't too useful for that sort of data source. So I'm going to switch this one up to a pie. And it looks like a very pretty pie at the moment, but not very useful. So what I'm going to do is do a group. So I can group by the priority. So we've now got our high, normal, and low priority tasks. And then we're performing a sum of how many items. We want to change that one to a count. So we're doing a count of the IDs. So we now have how many tasks are normal priority, how many are high priority, and how many are low priority. And once again, we can get in and change some of the properties around this pie chart. So just like before, we can change the color. So we may work with the theme color on that one. And we can also offset something. So if we were trying to make a point about the high priority tasks in here, what I could do is offset that so it extends that out so that that's more visible on the page. We can also go into the chart settings in here. We can make it 3D if we want to. So we have a 3D chart, and we can also, if we turn that off, make it a donut chart. So we can set the radius of the hole there. And we can also format this display, so either percentage, or we can set it into showing the actual value behind that. And we can change the angle if I wanted to rotate that round. So very simple to get to a pie chart from aggregated content in the Lightning Conductor. Now the Lightning Conductor opens up the number of data sources dramatically. What I've configured this one to do actually is to show users, not planner plans. So if I show you this, when we go into the Lightning Conductor, we can either use the Lightning Conductor to aggregate from SharePoint Search or from the SharePoint object model, or we can also get into Microsoft Graph as well. And with Microsoft Graph, I can query most things inside of Microsoft 365. So in this particular example, I'm going to be querying users. And what I've decided from all of the users in my tenant is to select the date and time that they were created and the user type. So whether they're a guest account or an internal account. So when we come to display, because it doesn't really matter what that's looking like here, I'm going to change the view so you can see the data. I purposely didn't choose the display name, so we're not seeing people, we're just seeing the IDs for those people, the created date, and the guest type. So, the user type, which is guest or member through here. So now with the data viewer, we can configure a connection to that. So once again, I'll build a chart, connect to the Lightning Conductor with the retrieved items. And I'll just choose the ID and the user type, and we could build a pie chart from there or not. Sorry, let's, yeah. What happened there? Anyway, you get the idea, hopefully. I just need to flip that one. But that is how we could connect to, different graph data if we wanted to accomplish that using the Lightning Connector as well. With Social Squared, I'll just point some of these out because we've already explored the different types of chart that we're looking at. So if we look at a tree map, when we configure the connection this time, so the data source is a SharePoint list, and you can see in here this is connecting to one of the hidden lists, which is Tag Cloud. So that's where we store all the tags for Social Squared. And when we go to the columns, we've got value and count, and under the display we can now map the size column, which is the count. So this is the count of the number of tags that are in here, and it's going to adjust that size accordingly. So SharePoint is the tag that's used the most, and in there we can go through and configure all of those colors if we want to. So we could have the maximum color, maybe blend with the theme color again, or something along those lines. Okay, so that's the mapping, and then we've also got the gauges as well, depending on what sort of chart you want to create around Social Squared. All right, so that's most of the data viewer. The other thing that I just do want to point out is also the filters web part. So this is something that you can just go and get for free. So it's called Lightning Filters. It will work with the Lightning Connector, or it will also work with the data viewer. And it just gives me that ability when I'm building out a dashboard to provide filters to several web parts at the same time. So there's different types of user interface to it. We've got taxonomy filters, people filters, choice filters, etc. So in here I could make this perhaps a choice filter, and we could manage the choices. So I'm just going to add in some countries in here. I get this right. So we can have a display value and a filterable value as well. So if it's filtering on an ID or something like that. So that gives me my choices, and now I can actually connect to that via our view. So here in this OData view, under columns, we can go against the country, and I can get the connection from Lightning Filters, and we can use the filterable value. And so now we're not seeing anything inside that list of customers until I choose a country, and then we get to see the countries and so on. And that could be serving other web parts as well in one go. Okay, and then last of all, I just want to show you how inside of Teams, we don't have to use it as a SharePoint page. That is actually my preference, but what you can do, instead of showing it as an entire page like this, we can just add the data viewer as its own tab. So I can choose that here. So this could be configured for whatever data source. We can configure those from scratch, or what I could also do is just come back here into an existing instance that I've created, and I could export the configuration. So that team is the underlying or the team for this particular SharePoint site. So now when I come back here, I can just simply import that JSON file. And now I've got the same configurations. I'm looking at the Excel workbook or the OData. Of course, that's relying on the filtered web part now, but yeah, we've got those connections coming through. Okay, so we can have the same experience in SharePoint or in Teams if you'd prefer that. Okay, so that brings me to an end of the demos. So just want to point out some of the things that are new in this release of the data viewer. So we've done a bit of work around the conditional formatting. We've enhanced that to offer things like the pill color, the modern experience around that. Also, the data formatting as well has been improved. So we're able to make that more customized based on the list that you're bringing the data in from. And also, along with all of our other web parts, instead of you visiting our website in order to gain access to our help and so on, what you'll find inside the web part is there's a getting started guide that you can reference right there. So of course, if you were to acquire this product and it's in your web part gallery, you get to add the data viewer to a page somewhere, whoever's added that web part may not be aware that it came from Lightning Tools, so they don't necessarily know to go to the Lightning Tools website and so on. So there's inline help throughout the web part now that you can gain access to. Okay, so at that point, I'm going to open up to questions. So if you've got any questions and you'd like to post them either in the chat window or in the Q&A panel, I'll be happy to read those out and answer those questions. Or if you prefer, you can also reach out to me on brett@lightningtools.com. Or if you're interested in talking to the sales team about a demo or a trial of this web part, then you can reach out to sales@lightningtools.com as well. You can also go and help yourself to a trial if you want to. Yeah, you could do that from our website if you go and visit the Data Viewer product page. Okay, so I'm looking at the chat window and I see there is a question in here already. So can we connect to Dataverse or on-prem resources via a data gateway? So interesting you should ask that. At the moment, the answer to that question is no. And the answer to that question was no, because we weren't able to through the SharePoint framework. That wasn't possible, but that has been a while since we investigated whether you could do that or not. So we've actually added it to our roadmap. When you go on to lightningtools.com, just point out where you can get to our roadmap as well. So it's under the customers section. You'll see everything we're working on this year. And so here in August, we're going to be looking at extending the data sources that you can connect to. Now, at the moment, this is a little bit vague because we are investigating whether we can now connect to Dataverse and so on. We couldn't at the time when we last looked, but the SharePoint framework is changing all the time. Maybe that we now can. So we're going to be digging into that to see if that's possible. With regards to any on-premises data sources, you can use OData. That will require that you create an OData service, but that could be quite easy if you use Visual Studio. You don't actually even have to write code, even though you're in Visual Studio. You can just simply generate an OData service to expose the data. Of course, you want to add some authentication to that and so on as well. Yeah, you could connect to the on-prem data that way if you wanted to. There's also, of course, synchronizing with SQL Azure. So if you synchronize with SQL Azure, that would also give you access to on-prem data if it was synchronizing that way. So hopefully that answers the question, and hopefully our answer will change later on in the year as to whether we can connect to some of those. But yeah, the data gateway and Dataverse are on our plan to connect to. So will we get a recording of this after the presentation? Yes. So there will be a recording. You're actually going to find it here on our website under webinars, but we will send a link out to you first, so you'll gain access to that, and yeah, you can share that if need be. There's all our previous webinars there as well, so feel free to go and watch those back if there's interest in some of the other tools that we looked at. Okay, so another question, can I use Lightning Tools, so I presume the Data Viewer, to create data entry and edit views for teams? So I'm not sure. So can you data entry via Teams? I guess so. Collecting the data into some sort of table. Yeah, you could do that through SQL Azure. That would be possible. So if you connected to a SQL Azure database, you could certainly collect the data. If you wanted to collect the data into a SharePoint list, at the moment the answer would be no, but you could perhaps just add that SharePoint list anyway as a Teams tab to collect data through there. You could certainly do it with Lightning Forms if you wanted to build a custom form to collect data entry into a SharePoint list. That way, if you wanted to add more business logic and design it as a business form as opposed to just a list, then that could also work for you as well. Okay, I think that's all the questions that we have today. So yeah, if anything else comes up, feel free to reach out. So once again, brett@lightningtools.com is how you'll find me, and sales@lightningtools.com if you want to have a sales conversation. But at that point, you've won yourself 10 minutes. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining, and hopefully see you next month where we have another exciting product. This is going to be a new product to our portfolio, which is actually an offering through a partner of ours. And what this is going to do is allow us to migrate forms from InfoPath or from PDF forms or Word forms. If you've got any of those Word forms that people have to fill out, you'll be able to transform those using a wizard into Lightning forms. So yeah, if you're interested in that, if you've got hundreds of business forms that you need to migrate away from InfoPath, then register for our next webinar, and you'll be able to see how we can help you out with that one and Lightning forms to have a modern experience, customizable form inside of SharePoint. All right, thank you very much, everybody. I hope to see you next month. Take care.